The morning of October 12, 1991, dawned crystal clear over Boulder, Colorado. The aspen trees lining the foothills blazed golden against the deep blue sky, and a crisp autumn wind carried the promise of adventure. Three lifelong friends, Jake Morrison, Alex Chen, and Tommy Rodriguez, stood at the trailhead of the Lost Creek Wilderness, their breath visible in small puffs as they adjusted their heavy canvas backpacks. At 19, they were students at the University of Colorado, taking advantage of the long Columbus Day weekend to tackle what they dubbed their ultimate backcountry challenge. Jake, the natural leader of the group with his sandy hair and easy grin, had spent weeks planning this expedition into the remote sections of the Front Range. His father owned Morrison's outdoor gear on Pearl Street, and Jake had grown up testing every piece of camping equipment that came through the shop. From the time he could walk, he'd been hiking the trails around Boulder, progressing from easy nature walks to challenging 14er climbs by the time he reached high school. His methodical approach to outdoor adventures had earned him respect among the local climbing community, and several gear manufacturers regularly sent him equipment to test in Colorado's demanding mountain environment. Alex, the quiet, methodical one, was studying geology at CU and had become fascinated by the Precambrian formations that jutted from these ancient mountains. His backpack always contained rock samples, field notebooks, and specialized geological tools that his friends had learned to accommodate on their adventures. Alex's scientific mind brought a different perspective to their outdoor pursuits. He could read the landscape like a book, identifying mineral deposits, understanding how glacial action had carved the valleys they explored, and predicting weather patterns based on cloud formations and atmospheric pressure changes. His professors often joked that Alex learned more geology on weekend adventures than most students absorbed in entire semesters. Tommy, the jokester who could make anyone laugh even in the worst weather, rounded out their trio with his infectious enthusiasm and uncanny ability to find food in any wilderness. He'd grown up in a large Mexican-American family in Arvada, where outdoor cooking and camping were family traditions passed down through generations. Tommy's grandmother had taught him to identify edible plants. His uncles had shown him fishing techniques that worked in Colorado's high-altitude streams, and his natural charisma made him the group's unofficial morale officer. Even during their most challenging adventures, Tommy could lighten the mood with perfectly timed jokes or stories from his colorful extended family. If you're enjoying this story of mystery and adventure, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. The three had been inseparable since middle school, when they'd first discovered their shared love for the outdoors during a Boy Scout camping trip to Rocky Mountain National Park. That first adventure had revealed their complementary strengths: Jake's leadership and planning abilities, Alex's scientific curiosity and technical knowledge, and Tommy's social skills and practical wilderness wisdom. Throughout high school, they'd spent virtually every weekend exploring different areas of the Colorado Rockies, gradually building their skills and confidence for more ambitious expeditions. Now, as college sophomores, they'd grown more ambitious in their adventures, seeking out unmarked trails and remote camping spots where they could truly disconnect from the pressures of university life. Their dormitory friends had grown accustomed to seeing the trio disappear on Friday afternoons, with heavy backpacks, returning Sunday evening with stories of incredible vistas, challenging climbs, and the kind of profound experiences that only wilderness immersion could provide. This weekend's destination was a series of high alpine lakes nestled in a basin that could only be reached after a grueling 12-mile hike through dense forest and across several knife-edge ridges. Their parents had long since learned to trust their sons' outdoor judgment. Margaret Morrison had initially worried about Jake's increasingly ambitious adventures, but his careful preparation and extensive wilderness training had gradually convinced her that he was as safe as anyone could be in the backcountry. Jake carried comprehensive first aid supplies, had completed wilderness first responder training, and never took unnecessary risks. His methodical approach to route planning and emergency preparedness had prevented several potentially dangerous situations during previous expeditions. Dr. Henry Chen, a professor of environmental science at CU, actually encouraged his son's geological fieldwork, often requesting samples and photographs from their adventures for use in his classes. Alex's wilderness expeditions provided real-world examples that enhanced Dr. Chen's teaching, and the professor appreciated how outdoor experiences deepened his son's understanding of geological processes. The family's academic background had instilled in Alex a respect for scientific methodology that made him an exceptionally safe and observant wilderness traveler. Maria Rodriguez trusted that her Tommy's street-smart instincts and extensive family outdoor experience would keep him safe in any environment. The Rodriguez family had been exploring Colorado's wilderness for generations, and Maria had watched Tommy develop the kind of practical outdoor skills that couldn't be learned from books or classes. His ability to read weather, navigate by natural landmarks, and maintain group morale made him an invaluable member of any wilderness expedition. The forecast called for clear weather through Tuesday, with temperatures dropping into the 20s at night, cold but manageable for experienced campers with proper equipment. The friends had packed accordingly, down sleeping bags rated to 15 below zero, a 4-season mountain tent that could withstand severe weather, and enough food for 5 days in case they decided to extend their adventure. Their emergency supplies included a comprehensive first aid kit, emergency shelter, signal mirror, emergency whistle, and high-calorie emergency rations. What they didn't have, because it didn't exist yet in any practical form for civilian use, was any kind of electronic communication device or GPS navigation system. As they shouldered their 60-pound packs and set off into the wilderness, Jake paused to sign the trail register, one of the last times anyone would document their presence in the civilized world. His neat handwriting recorded their names, planned route, and expected return date of October 14th. The register entry would later become crucial evidence in the massive search operation that would follow their disappearance. The three friends disappeared into the forest, their voices and laughter gradually fading as the towering ponderosa pines and Douglas fir trees swallowed them up, beginning an adventure that would end in tragedy and remain a mystery for 16 years. Tuesday evening, October 15th, 1991, came and went without any sign of the three young men at the designated pickup location in the Chatfield Reservoir parking area. Initially, their families weren't overly concerned. The friends had occasionally extended trips when they discovered particularly interesting areas or when weather conditions created opportunities for additional exploration. Jake had established a pattern of responsible communication, always contacting home if plans changed significantly, but cell phones weren't yet common among college students, and the wilderness areas they explored had no means of electronic communication. By Wednesday morning, October 16th, concern had escalated to alarm. Margaret Morrison had called the Chen and Rodriguez families at dawn, confirming that none of them had heard from their sons. The three families converged at the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office by 8 a.m., bringing maps, photographs, and detailed information about the friends' planned route and expected timeline. Sheriff's Deputy Robert Martinez took their initial report and immediately recognized the serious nature of the situation. Three experienced outdoors enthusiasts, 2 days overdue, in increasingly challenging weather conditions. Within hours, the largest search and rescue operation in Colorado's Front Range history was underway. Search and rescue teams from Jefferson, Boulder, Clear Creek and Park counties converged on the wilderness area, joined by volunteer firefighters, National Guard units, and hundreds of civilian volunteers who had responded to radio appeals for help. The Colorado Mountain Rescue Association coordinated ground teams, while the Civil Air Patrol organized aerial search operations using small aircraft and National Guard helicopters. The search was immediately hampered by the remote nature of the terrain the friends had intended to explore. The area they'd planned to visit was designated wilderness, meaning no motorized vehicles were permitted, and the terrain was accessible only on foot or horseback. Elevations ranged from 8,000 to over 12,000 feet, creating significant logistical challenges for search teams who had to carry all their equipment while covering vast areas of difficult terrain. Thick forest covered most of the lower elevations, while above tree line, a maze of granite ridges and scree slopes provided countless places where three small figures could disappear entirely from aerial view. Colorado National Guard helicopters flew grid patterns over the wilderness for days, their crews scanning the forest canopy and alpine zones through powerful binoculars and early thermal imaging equipment. The distinctive orange and blue colors of the Friends' North Face VE-25 tent should have been visible from the air against the autumn landscape. But searchers found nothing, despite flying hundreds of hours over the designated search area. The helicopter crews reported perfect visibility and ideal flying conditions, making their failure to locate any trace of the missing friends increasingly ominous. Ground search teams followed every marked and unmarked trail in the region, calling out names that echoed off the canyon walls and returned unanswered. Experienced wilderness guides who knew every drainage and ridge in the area led teams of volunteers through terrain that would have challenged even seasoned hikers. Search dogs were brought in from Colorado Springs and Denver, German shepherds and bloodhounds trained to locate human scent in wilderness conditions. The dogs showed interest at several locations near established trails, but lost the scent in the rocky terrain above treeline. The Colorado Mountain Rescue Association brought in their most experienced trackers, men and women who could follow signs that others would miss entirely. These experts had decades of experience reading disturbed soil, bent vegetation, and subtle terrain modifications that indicated human passage. They found traces of boot prints near some of the lower elevation water sources, prints that could have belonged to the missing friends, but in the rocky terrain above treeline, even the most skilled trackers lost all sign of passage. The granite slabs and loose scree above 10,000 feet showed no evidence of recent human travel. Search and rescue coordinator Captain James Wilson had participated in hundreds of wilderness rescues during his 20-year career, but the complete absence of any trace of the three friends presented an unprecedented challenge. Typically, even in the most difficult rescues, searchers could find some evidence of the missing party's route, discarded equipment, footprints, broken vegetation, or emergency signals. The total lack of any sign suggested either that the friends had never reached their intended destination or that some catastrophic event had occurred in an area that searchers hadn't yet covered. Local news stations picked up the story on Thursday, October 17th, broadcasting the friends' photographs and descriptions across Colorado and neighboring states. Channel 9. News in Denver ran nightly updates on the search efforts, showing dramatic footage of helicopters circling over endless expanses of forest and rocky peaks. Reporter Sarah Mitchell provided live coverage from the search command post, interviewing family members and search coordinators, while emphasizing the challenging conditions facing rescue teams. The story captured public imagination partly because the missing young men represented every parent's worst nightmare. Responsible, experienced outdoors enthusiasts who had simply vanished in terrain they knew well. Boulder and Denver newspapers ran front-page articles about the search, including detailed maps of the search area and timelines of the Friends' last known activities. Radio stations throughout the Front Range broadcast regular updates, asking listeners to report any information that might help locate the missing college students. Jake's father, Tom Morrison, organized civilian search efforts from a command post established in the Chatfield Reservoir parking area. Using his connections in Boulder's outdoor community, he coordinated with official search teams while managing the dozens of volunteers who arrived daily to help look for the missing friends. Local climbing clubs, hiking organizations, and outdoor gear companies provided both volunteers and specialized equipment to support the search effort. REI, Neptune Mountaineering, and other outdoor retailers donated supplies and offered expert advice about wilderness survival and search techniques. Dr. Chen used his scientific background to analyze weather patterns, geological maps, and historical data about previous search and rescue operations in the region. He created detailed charts showing probable routes the Friends might have taken, factoring in their known preferences for challenging but safe travel routes and Alex's particular interest in geological formations. Weather Service records from the period showed that conditions had been ideal during the Friends' planned expedition, with clear skies and moderate temperatures that should have posed no significant challenges to experienced hikers. The search effort continued for 2 full weeks, with teams covering over 500 square miles of wilderness terrain. Horseback search teams explored remote areas inaccessible to hikers carrying heavy search equipment. Rock climbing specialists rappelled into deep canyons and gorges where an accident might have occurred. Cave rescue experts explored known cave systems in the area, checking whether the Friends might have sought shelter in underground passages and become trapped or lost. As October stretched into November and the first significant snowfall of the season began to blanket the high country, the official search operation was gradually scaled back to prevent additional casualties among search personnel. Winter conditions in the Colorado Rockies transform the landscape into a realm that few humans can survive without proper shelter and equipment. As November snow began accumulating in the high country, search coordinators faced the painful reality that rescue operations would soon become impossible to conduct safely. Search and rescue teams had already encountered several close calls with early winter storms, and the risk of losing additional lives in search operations had to be weighed against the increasingly remote possibility of finding the 3 Friends alive. Captain James Wilson made the difficult decision to scale back search operations on November 8, 1991, nearly a month after the Friends' disappearance. The last official helicopter flight was conducted that morning, with Flight for Life paramedic Bill Harrison and pilot Dave Thompson making a final systematic sweep of the primary search area. Harrison, who had participated in dozens of mountain rescues during his 15-year career, later described that final search flight as one of the most haunting experiences of his professional life. Flying over miles of snow-covered wilderness, where 3 young men had simply vanished, felt like bearing witness to the mountain's ultimate victory over human ambition. Search teams conducted several final sweeps of accessible areas during the first week of November, but deepening snow and sub-zero temperatures made extended operations too dangerous to justify. Volunteer search teams from local climbing organizations made heroic efforts to explore areas that official teams couldn't safely access. But these unofficial searches also had to be abandoned as winter conditions intensified. The search officially transitioned to limited continuous status, meaning that any future developments would trigger renewed search efforts, but no regular search operations would continue through the winter months. The families struggled to accept that their sons were almost certainly dead, victims of some accident or emergency that had befallen them in the unforgiving high country. Memorial services were planned for early December, but without bodies to bury, the concept of closure remained elusive and painful. Reverend Michael Patterson of Boulder's First United Methodist Church worked with all three families to plan memorial services that would honor the friends' lives while acknowledging the uncertainty surrounding their fate. The University of Colorado held a memorial assembly on December 3, 1991, in the Glenn Miller Ballroom of the University Memorial Center. Over 800 people attended, including family members, friends, professors, and fellow students who had been touched by the story. Professor Richardson from the geology department spoke about Alex's passionate interest in Colorado's geological history and his potential for significant contributions to the field. Jake's academic advisor described his leadership qualities and his influence on fellow students interested in outdoor recreation and environmental studies. Tommy's fraternity brothers shared stories that captured his humor and his ability to bring people together across social and cultural boundaries. Jake's bedroom remained exactly as he'd left it, his geology textbook still open to a chapter about glacial formations in the Rockies. His topographic maps covered one wall, marked with red pins indicating peaks he'd climbed and blue pins showing areas he'd planned to explore. Margaret Morrison found herself entering his room daily, straightening items that didn't need straightening and maintaining a space frozen in time from October 12, 1991. Alex's mother, Linda Chen, continued to set 4 places at the dinner table for months, unable to accept that her quiet, thoughtful son wouldn't be coming home for his favorite meal of green chile enchiladas. Dr. Chen dealt with his grief by throwing himself into research, spending long hours in his office analyzing geological surveys and satellite imagery of the search area, convinced that scientific methodology might reveal clues that had eluded searchers. Tommy's little sister, Sophia, then 14, kept his Colorado Rockies baseball cap on her dresser and maintained his CD collection exactly as he'd left it. She couldn't understand how someone as clever and resourceful as her big brother could simply disappear without explanation. Maria Rodriguez found comfort in cooking Tommy's favorite foods and sharing them with neighbors and search volunteers, channeling her grief into acts of service that honored her son's generous spirit. The mystery consumed the families in different ways over the following months and years. Tom Morrison became intensely involved in wilderness safety advocacy, eventually helping to establish better trail marking systems and emergency communication protocols for backcountry areas throughout Colorado. He worked with Colorado Parks and Wildlife to improve trailhead registration systems and lobbied for funding to install emergency communication equipment in remote wilderness areas. Dr. Chen began researching historical disappearances in Colorado's mountains, building a comprehensive database of missing persons cases that he hoped might reveal patterns or insights applicable to his son's disappearance. His research uncovered dozens of unsolved cases spanning over a century of Colorado mountain recreation, revealing that even experienced outdoors enthusiasts occasionally vanished without trace in the state's vast wilderness areas. This research became both his obsession and his method of processing grief. Maria Rodriguez became involved with Colorado Families of Missing Persons, a support organization for parents and relatives facing similar tragedies. Her natural warmth and strength made her a source of comfort for other families dealing with the unique challenges of ambiguous loss, grieving someone who might still be alive while accepting the probability that death had occurred. Her involvement with the organization eventually led to improvements in missing persons protocols and victim services throughout Colorado. The 1991 Christmas season proved especially difficult for all three families. Holiday traditions that had always included their sons felt incomplete and painful. The families spent Christmas Day together, sharing memories and supporting each other through a season that emphasized family unity and homecoming. New Year's Eve 1991 marked the end of the most traumatic period any of them had ever experienced, but also the beginning of learning to live with uncertainty and unresolved grief. Spring 1992 brought renewed hope for some family members who believed that melting snow might reveal evidence that had been concealed during winter months. Tom Morrison organized several informal search expeditions during April and May, enlisting experienced hikers and climbers to explore areas that had been inaccessible during the previous year's official search. These volunteer efforts covered additional terrain and maintained hope, but they produced no new evidence about the friends' fate. The first anniversary of the disappearance, October 12, 1992, was observed with a memorial hike to the original trailhead where the friends had begun their final adventure. Over 200 people participated, including family members, search volunteers, university friends, and members of Colorado's outdoor community who had been moved by the story. The Denver Post covered the memorial hike, noting that the case had become symbolic of both the rewards and risks of Colorado mountain recreation. Years passed, and the acute pain of loss gradually transformed into a deep, persistent ache that became part of each family's daily reality. The families learned to navigate holidays and anniversaries, to answer well-meaning questions from friends who had moved on while they remained frozen in October 1991. High school reunions and college homecomings served as annual reminders of the lives their sons should have been living, careers they should have pursued, families they might have started, adventures they would never experience. The wilderness where the friends had vanished became both sacred and forbidden territory for their families. Some relatives made annual pilgrimage hikes to the trailhead, leaving flowers and sharing memories in the place where their sons had last been seen. Others found the mountains too painful to visit, choosing instead to honor their sons' memories through urban memorial activities and scholarship funds established in their names. Local hiking communities maintained awareness of the unsolved disappearance, sharing the story with newcomers and reminding experienced outdoors enthusiasts that even careful, well-prepared adventurers could face unexpected disasters. The case became part of Colorado mountaineering folklore, a cautionary tale told around campfires and in gear shops throughout the Front Range, serving as a reminder that the mountains demanded constant respect and humility from all who entered their domain. Professional search and rescue personnel never entirely abandoned hope, even as years stretched into decades. Mountain Rescue Association teams occasionally received reports of equipment discoveries or unidentified remains in remote areas of Colorado's wilderness, and each report triggered careful investigation to determine whether new evidence about Jake, Alex, and Tommy had finally emerged. Jefferson County Sheriff's Office maintained an active case file, and detectives periodically reviewed the evidence, hoping that advances in investigative techniques might reveal overlooked clues. Detective Linda Martinez inherited the case in 1995 when she joined the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office as a specialist in cold case investigations. Martinez brought fresh perspective to the 4-year-old mystery, conducting new interviews with family members, search personnel, and witnesses who had interacted with the friends during their final days. Her systematic review of evidence files revealed the thoroughness of the original investigation, but produced no new leads about what had happened to the 3 experienced hikers. The advent of improved satellite technology in the mid-1990s prompted some renewed search efforts coordinated by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Civil Air Patrol units conducted several high-resolution aerial reconnaissance missions using enhanced photographic equipment capable of detecting objects much smaller than conventional search aircraft could identify. These searches covered hundreds of square miles of terrain, focusing on areas that had been inaccessible or inadequately searched during the original 1991 operation. Advanced satellite imagery became available through military cooperation programs that allowed civilian law enforcement agencies to access reconnaissance technology previously reserved for national security purposes. FBI specialists trained in satellite image analysis reviewed high-resolution photographs of the entire Lost Creek Wilderness area, searching for geometric patterns or color variations that might indicate human artifacts. These technical searches represented the most sophisticated investigation techniques available during the 1990s, but they produced no conclusive evidence about the missing friends. Adventure magazines and outdoor television programs occasionally featured the story, keeping public awareness alive and sometimes generating new tips or theories from viewers across the country. Outside Magazine published a comprehensive article about the disappearance in May 1996, 5 years after the fact, interviewing the families and search personnel while examining various hypotheses about what might have happened to the 3 experienced outdoors enthusiasts. The article generated dozens of letters from readers who had experienced similar close calls in Colorado's wilderness, but no concrete information about the specific case. National Geographic Television produced a documentary segment about Colorado wilderness disappearances that featured the Friends case as part of a broader examination of missing persons in America's mountain regions. The program, which aired in 1997, reached millions of viewers and generated several hundred calls to law enforcement agencies, but follow-up investigation revealed that most tips involved cases of mistaken identity or unrelated missing persons from other states and time periods. The families dealt with periodic false hopes generated by well-meaning hikers who reported equipment sightings or claimed to have found human remains in remote locations throughout Colorado's mountain regions. Each report required investigation, forcing the families to relive their grief while maintaining hope that this time, finally, they might get answers. Detective Martinez estimated that her office investigated over 50 separate reports of possible evidence related to the case between 1995 and 2005, but most proved to involve unrelated missing persons cases, animal remains, or misidentified natural objects. Advances in forensic science during the 1990s offered new possibilities for cold case investigations involving missing persons. DNA testing became more sophisticated and accessible, creating hope that even badly degraded remains might eventually be identified if they were discovered years or decades after death. The families provided genetic samples to law enforcement agencies and maintained contact with forensic specialists at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation who specialized in cold case DNA analysis. Computer databases of missing persons information became more comprehensive and interconnected during the late 1990s, allowing investigators to cross-reference cases across state lines and identify patterns that might not be apparent when examining individual cases in isolation. Detective Martinez regularly submitted the Friends case information to national missing persons databases and participated in regional law enforcement conferences focused on cold case investigation techniques. By the late 1990s, the missing persons case had taken on legendary status within Colorado's outdoor community. Guide services and mountaineering schools throughout the Front Range used the story as part of their wilderness safety curricula, emphasizing the importance of emergency preparedness, communication protocols, and conservative decision-making in backcountry environments. Colorado Mountain Club chapters observed October 12th as an unofficial day of remembrance for missing outdoors enthusiasts, acknowledging both the Friends specifically and all those who had vanished in the mountains. Hiking clubs and climbing organizations developed safety protocols, partly inspired by the friends' disappearance, including requirements for emergency communication devices, detailed itinerary filing, and regular check-in procedures for groups undertaking challenging wilderness expeditions. Colorado Parks and Wildlife incorporated lessons from the case into their backcountry education programs, using the story to illustrate how even experienced, well-prepared outdoors enthusiasts could encounter emergencies beyond their control. The first consumer GPS units became available in the early 1990s, but the technology remained expensive, bulky, and unreliable for several years after the friends' disappearance. Early GPS receivers cost several $1,000s, weighed several pounds, and required extensive technical knowledge to operate effectively. Military restrictions on GPS accuracy for civilian users meant that early units were accurate only to within several hundred feet, limiting their usefulness for precision navigation in wilderness areas. By the late 1990s, however, handheld GPS receivers had become practical tools for serious backcountry travelers. Tom Morrison became an early advocate for GPS technology in wilderness recreation, believing that satellite navigation might have prevented his son's disappearance, or at least provided searchers with precise location data that could have dramatically improved rescue chances. He frequently spoke at outdoor gear exhibitions and mountaineering conferences about the potential for GPS technology to improve wilderness safety. Municipal emergency services throughout Colorado began incorporating GPS technology into their search and rescue operations by the turn of the millennium. Jefferson County and Boulder County Sheriff's Departments invested in GPS mapping systems that allowed them to coordinate search efforts more effectively, maintain precise records of areas that had been searched, and integrate aerial reconnaissance with ground team operations. This technology represented a quantum leap in search and rescue capabilities compared to the paper maps and radio communication systems available during the Friends' 1991 disappearance. Colorado Mountain Rescue Association began requiring GPS proficiency for all search and rescue volunteers by 2000, recognizing that satellite navigation technology could prevent the kind of systematic search gaps that might have occurred during the Friends case. Training programs emphasized both GPS operation and traditional navigation techniques, ensuring that rescue personnel could function effectively even if electronic equipment failed in emergency situations. The advent of cell phone coverage in many Colorado wilderness areas during the late 1990s provided another layer of emergency communication that hadn't been available when the Friends disappeared. Cellular towers installed to serve ski resort areas and popular recreation sites created communication coverage in previously isolated regions, though high mountain basins and deep canyon areas remained beyond cellular range. Emergency beacon technology evolved rapidly during the 1990s, with personal locator beacons and satellite messengers becoming available to civilian users. These devices could transmit GPS coordinates and emergency signals to rescue coordination centers via satellite networks, providing capabilities that might have allowed the Friends to summon help if they had encountered an emergency situation during their 1991 expedition. The summer of 2007 marked the 16th anniversary of the Friends' disappearance, a milestone that prompted renewed media attention and reflection from the families who had never stopped hoping for answers. By this time, GPS technology had become ubiquitous, built into cell phones, automotive navigation systems, and handheld devices used by hunters, hikers, and other outdoor enthusiasts. Google Earth allowed armchair investigators to examine satellite imagery of remote wilderness areas with unprecedented detail, and several online communities had formed around cold case investigations of missing persons throughout the American West. Dr. Michael Stevens, a geology professor at Colorado State University, had spent several summers conducting mineral surveys in the Lost Creek Wilderness as part of an ongoing research project funded by the U.S. Geological Survey. Stevens specialized in rare earth mineral deposits in Colorado's Precambrian formations, research that required him to spend weeks each summer in some of the state's most remote wilderness areas. His work involved systematic geological sampling that took him far from established trails and into areas that few humans ever visited. Stevens was well aware of the 1991 disappearance and had always kept an eye out for any sign of the missing friends while conducting his fieldwork. Like many longtime Colorado outdoors enthusiasts, he knew the story and understood that the mystery remained unsolved despite years of investigation. His geological training had taught him to observe landscapes carefully and notice details that others might overlook, skills that made him particularly well-suited to spot evidence of human presence in wilderness environments. In July 2007, Stevens was using a high-precision GPS unit to map quartzite formations in a particularly remote section of the wilderness when his equipment led him to a discovery that would finally provide answers to a 16-year-old mystery. Stevens was following GPS coordinates derived from geological survey maps to investigate a mineral formation that showed promise for containing rare earth elements when he noticed something that didn't belong in the natural landscape. The Garmin GPS unit Stevens carried was accurate to within 3 feet, far more precise than any navigation equipment available in 1991. His research protocol required him to visit specific GPS coordinates identified through satellite imagery analysis and geological modeling, a systematic approach that took him to locations that random hiking would never have revealed. The precision of modern GPS technology allowed him to navigate directly to geological features of interest, following routes that would have been impossible to locate using traditional navigation methods. Partially concealed beneath years of accumulated pine needles, aspen leaves, and forest debris, Stevens spotted what appeared to be manufactured fabric, the distinctive ripstop nylon of a high-quality mountain tent. The fabric's synthetic orange and blue colors were still visible despite 16 years of exposure to Colorado mountain weather, though they had faded significantly and were partially obscured by natural camouflage. Stevens's geological training had taught him to recognize non-natural materials in wilderness environments, and he immediately realized that his discovery might be significant. Carefully clearing away the natural debris, Stevens uncovered the collapsed remains of what had once been a North Face VE-25 mountain tent, the exact model that Jake Morrison's family had reported the friends were carrying during their October 1991 expedition. The tent was severely weathered and partially collapsed, but still recognizable to anyone familiar with high-end mountaineering equipment. More importantly, the GPS coordinates of the tent's location placed it nearly 3 miles southeast of the route the friends had indicated in the trail register in a remote, hanging valley that had never been systematically searched during the original operation. Stevens immediately used his GPS unit to record the precise coordinates of the discovery, 39°-17, 33N, 105°-28T17W, at an elevation of 10,147 feet. He photographed the scene extensively using a digital camera with GPS capability that automatically embedded location data in each image. His scientific training prompted him to document the discovery thoroughly before disturbing anything, understanding that this might be a crime scene requiring careful forensic examination. Stevens then hiked directly out of the wilderness to the nearest Forest Service ranger station, following GPS navigation that allowed him to take the most efficient route through challenging terrain. Within 3 hours of his discovery, he was providing detailed information to Ranger Patricia Walsh, who immediately contacted Jefferson County Sheriff's Office to report the potential breakthrough in the 16-year-old missing persons case. Detective Linda Martinez received Stevens's report at 4:30 p.m. on July 18, 2007, and immediately recognized its significance. The GPS coordinates Stevens provided allowed her to locate the discovery site precisely on topographic maps and satellite imagery, confirming that the location had never been searched during the original operation. The remote hanging valley where Stevens had made his discovery was accessible only through dense forest and steep terrain that would have deterred most searchers, explaining why the site had remained undiscovered for 16 years. Martinez organized a specialized forensic recovery team for the following morning, coordinating with the Jefferson County Coroner's Office, Colorado Bureau of Investigation forensic specialists, and experienced mountain rescue personnel who could navigate safely to the remote location. The precision of Stevens's GPS coordinates meant that the recovery team could navigate directly to the site without extensive searching, a capability that would have been impossible with 1990s technology. GPS navigation allowed the recovery team to reach Stevens's discovery site in less than 4 hours, despite the challenging terrain and lack of established trails. Team leader Sergeant Mike Rodriguez used a handheld GPS unit to guide the team through the most efficient route, while forensic photographer Janet Wilson documented their approach and the site's relationship to surrounding geographical features. The scene told a story that investigators had never imagined during the original search operation. The tent was pitched in what appeared to be an emergency campsite, approximately 400 yards from the nearest water source and far from any established trail or recognized camping area. Personal belongings were scattered around the site. Sleeping bags, backpacks, and camping equipment that had been exposed to 16 years of mountain weather, but remained partially preserved by Colorado's dry climate and high elevation. Most significantly, human remains were discovered both inside and around the tent, finally answering the question that had haunted 3 families for over 16 years. Coroner Dr. Sarah Mitchell conducted a preliminary examination at the site, determining that the remains appeared to belong to 3 individuals and showed no obvious signs of trauma or foul play. The condition of the remains and their relationship to the camping equipment suggested that the friends had survived for several days at the emergency campsite, but had ultimately succumbed to exposure during Colorado's notoriously unpredictable October weather. Forensic examination, conducted over the following weeks, revealed the tragic sequence of events that had led to the friends' deaths. Evidence suggested they had become lost or disoriented during their expedition, possibly during a sudden weather change or navigational error that led them far from their intended route. Weather Service records from October 1991 showed that an unexpected storm system had moved through the area on October 14-15, bringing heavy snow and sub-zero temperatures to the high country several days earlier than seasonal norms would have predicted. The friends had apparently been attempting to reach higher ground, where they might signal for help when they became trapped by rapidly deteriorating weather conditions. Tommy's journal, remarkably preserved inside a waterproof stuff sack, contained entries describing their growing concern about being lost and their attempts to navigate back to familiar territory using compass bearings and topographic landmarks. The final entry, dated October 15, 1991, described their decision to establish an emergency camp and wait for weather conditions to improve before attempting to continue towards safety. Personal items recovered from the site provided heartbreaking insights into the friends' final days and demonstrated both their wilderness skills and the overwhelming challenges they had faced during Colorado's early winter conditions. Tommy's journal contained detailed accounts of their navigation attempts, including compass bearings they had calculated and landmark identifications they had made while trying to determine their location. The entries revealed their growing awareness that they had become seriously lost, but also their confidence that their wilderness training and emergency supplies would enable them to survive until conditions improved. Alex's geological samples were still carefully organized in his backpack, evidence that he had continued pursuing his scientific interests even while facing an emergency situation. Rock specimens collected during their expedition were labeled with location descriptions and field notes that provided investigators with additional information about the route the friends had followed before becoming lost. Alex's geological training had apparently helped the group identify safe camping locations and water sources during their ordeal, demonstrating how their University of Colorado education had prepared them for wilderness survival. Jake's topographic map showed extensive hand-drawn notations indicating their attempts to determine their location using landmark identification and triangulation techniques. Red ink marks showed compass bearings to identifiable peaks, while pencil annotations recorded estimated distances and elevation calculations. The map revealed that Jake had been systematically attempting to navigate back to safety using traditional orienteering methods, but had been hindered by poor visibility and unfamiliar terrain that didn't match their pre-expedition route planning. Forensic analysis of the friends' equipment and clothing revealed that they had been well prepared for normal October camping conditions, but had encountered weather extremes that exceeded their gear capabilities. Their sleeping bags were rated for temperatures as low as 15 degrees Fahrenheit, adequate for typical autumn mountain camping, but insufficient for the sub-zero conditions that had occurred during the unexpected storm system of October 14th and 15, 1991. Coroner Dr. Sarah Mitchell determined that all three friends had died of hypothermia, likely within 48 to 72 hours of becoming lost. Toxicology analysis revealed no evidence of alcohol or drug impairment, confirming that their predicament had resulted from navigational challenges and weather conditions rather than poor judgment or reckless behavior. Time of death was estimated to have occurred between October 15th to 17, 1991, meaning the friends had died during the early days of the massive search operation that had been launched to find them. The GPS technology that led to the discovery represented a dramatic advancement over the navigation tools available in 1991. The friends had been carrying a silver compass and USGS topographic maps, reliable tools when used correctly, but inadequate for navigation in the whiteout conditions and complex terrain they had apparently encountered. Modern GPS units would have allowed them to maintain precise knowledge of their location regardless of weather conditions and navigate directly back to safety using electronic waypoints and route tracking. Dr. Michael Stevens later calculated that the friends' emergency campsite was located only 3 miles from a Forest Service road that would have led them to safety. However, the intervening terrain included several steep ridges and dense forest areas that would have been extremely difficult to navigate without precise directional guidance. GPS technology could have provided that guidance, potentially preventing the tragedy entirely by allowing the friends to navigate directly to safety, regardless of weather conditions or visibility limitations. Recovery of the remains required multiple helicopter flights due to the remote location and challenging terrain. Rocky Mountain Rescue Group personnel used GPS coordinates to guide Flight for Life helicopters to improvised landing zones that had been identified using satellite imagery and topographic analysis. The precision of modern navigation technology allowed investigators to conduct a thorough crime scene examination and evidence recovery operation that would have been logistically impossible with 1991-era equipment. Flight for Life pilot, Captain Robert Chen, no relation to Alex's family, noted that the GPS coordinates provided by Stevens allowed the helicopter to navigate directly to multiple landing zones near the site, minimizing the time required for evidence recovery and reducing the risk to rescue personnel. The precision navigation capabilities of modern aviation GPS systems meant that multiple flights could return to exactly the same locations, enabling systematic forensic documentation of the entire site. The families finally received the closure they had sought for 16 years, but the answers came with their own emotional complexity. Relief at finally knowing their son's fate mingled with renewed grief for lives cut short by circumstances that seemed both preventable and unavoidable. The friends had died not because of recklessness or poor preparation, but because they had encountered the kind of emergency situation that even experienced outdoors enthusiasts sometimes cannot survive, especially with 1990s navigation technology. Margaret Morrison expressed gratitude that the family finally knew what had happened to Jake, but also profound sadness that modern GPS technology could have saved her son's life if it had been available in 1991. Dr. Henry Chen noted the irony that geological research similar to his son's scientific interests had led to the discovery of Alex's remains. Maria Rodriguez found comfort in knowing that Tommy had been with his closest friends during their final days, and that their journal entries revealed their continued optimism and mutual support, even in desperate circumstances. Memorial services held in Boulder and Denver during August 2007 drew hundreds of people who'd been touched by the story over the years. Original search and rescue volunteers, fellow outdoor enthusiasts, university friends, and family members who had never stopped hoping for answers. Dr. Michael Stevens spoke about the role of GPS technology in both preventing and solving wilderness tragedies, emphasizing how advances in navigation technology could honor the friends' memory by preventing similar tragedies. Reverend Michael Patterson, who had conducted memorial services for the Friends in 1991, returned to lead their actual funeral services in 2007. He reflected on the 16-year journey the families had traveled from initial tragedy to final resolution, noting how their faith and mutual support had enabled them to survive the prolonged uncertainty that had defined their lives since October 1991. The Lost Creek Wilderness site where the Friends died became a memorial location visited by family members and others seeking to honor the memory of Jake, Alex, and Tommy. GPS coordinates for the site were not made public to preserve the dignity of the location and prevent inappropriate tourism, but family members used handheld GPS units to navigate precisely to the spot where their sons had spent their final days, finally able to visit a tangible place where they could honor their memory. Wilderness safety organizations throughout Colorado immediately began using the case to illustrate how GPS technology, satellite communication devices, and modern emergency equipment could prevent similar tragedies. Colorado Mountain Rescue Association incorporated the Friends' story into wilderness safety training programs, emphasizing how technological advances had fundamentally changed the risk profile of backcountry recreation since the 1990s. Emergency locator beacons, satellite messengers, and GPS-enabled cell phones became standard recommendations for backcountry travelers following the resolution of the case. Outdoor gear retailers throughout Colorado reported increased sales of emergency communication devices as the Friends' story reminded outdoor enthusiasts of the life-saving potential of modern technology that hadn't been available during the 1990s. The story of Jake Morrison, Alex Chen, and Tommy Rodriguez became a powerful reminder of how technological advancement could provide answers to questions that had seemed permanently unanswerable, offering hope to other families dealing with cold case disappearances and demonstrating the potential for GPS technology to solve mysteries that had confounded investigators for decades. Their tragedy, finally resolved after 16 years, served as both a cautionary tale about wilderness risks and an inspiring example of how scientific advancement and persistent investigation could eventually bring closure to families who refuse to abandon hope. The three friends' legacy lived on through improved wilderness safety protocols, advanced search and rescue techniques, and the knowledge that even the most challenging mysteries might eventually yield their secrets to human determination and technological innovation.